Trust Fund. That's a benefit to the nation. We put in some money for land and water. That will benefit the nation. And there's some money to establish an Oceans Trust. I ask for another minute.
Without objection.
That will benefit the nation. But the bulk of that penalty money will go to the Gulf Coast, and it will not be wasted. I promise you. The bill has tight safeguards and guidelines about the way that that money will be spent, restoring our marsh, rebuilding our coastline, which we've lost the size of the state of Rhode Island. And I want to thank so much the groups. There were over 200 organizations, from Ducks Unlimited to the National Environmental Defense Fund to Nature Conservancy to many of the chambers of commerce locally and nationally that supported the Restore Act. Without their help, this never, never would have happened, because you don't get a vote like we did on the Senate floor without a lot of help. We got, I believe, 74, and I'll check the record, more than 74, maybe it was 76 votes on the floor of the Senate. That's hard to get a resolution on mom and apple pie to get 76 votes today. So I'm very humbled to say that it was the work of many, many people. I was proud to lead this effort with Senator Shelby, my partner from Alabama. But my final comment is work needs to be done, and that's my final point. The amendment is in the transportation bill. The transportation bill has now left the building, left the Senate. It's now on its way over to the House. I hope the House will take this bill, and I know they have their own opinions about how things should be, but it is important to get this $110 billion of investments out for America. We need to keep this recovery going. People are looking for jobs, well-paying jobs, small businesses, get these contracts as well as large businesses for our rail, our water, our transportation. And I hope that the Restore Act, because it is safely tucked in this bill, will generate some additional votes on the House side. I hope my colleagues from the Gulf Coast in the House, Republicans and Democrats, will say overall, it may not be the House's transportation bill, but you know what? It's a good bill. And 22 Republicans over here voted for this bill. As Senator Inhofe said, there's streamlining, there's new approaches, there are better approaches, less waste, less fraud, less abuse in this bill. So there's some good things that we can vote on, and I hope, and I thank again in conclusion Senator Inhofe and Senator Boxer, and particularly Senator Baucus for his help in helping us at the very end to put what we needed to get together to pass this Restore Act. And I'll continue to report to you all how the courts are going to rule, how much this fine's going to be, and how that money is spent in the next couple of years to help save a very important part of our nation, and a part of the nation that contributes substantially to the GDP of our nation. Thank you, and let me ask, Mr. President, unanimous consent that the order to proceed to executive session at 2 p.m. be vitiated and that morning business be extended until 5 p.m. with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, and that the time be equally divided.
Without objection.
President.
Senator from New York is recognized.
First, let me compliment my colleague from Louisiana for her diligence, her hard work. I don't think anybody effectively delivers more for her state in this chamber than the senator from Louisiana. And I can assure you, knowing her, now that she's done this, she's going to have another proposal, and she'll be talking to us about it probably within a few hours. And she, because of her hard work and charm and many other good qualities, she never wears out her welcome, at least with the senator from New York. Mr. President, the big issue everyone's talking about is gasoline prices. Obviously, they're a scourge for average families and on our national economy. And there are many long-term solutions we debate: the pipeline, incentives for green energy, more exploration, nuclear energy, and, of course, conservation, probably the #1 way to, in the long term, reduce imports of foreign oil here into the country and reduce the price. But everyone's asking, what are short-term solutions? Well, to me, there's obviously one that would matter more than all the others and that has the best hope of getting something done. And so 2 weeks ago, in a letter to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, I asked the State Department to pressure the government of Saudi Arabia to use its excess oil capacity as a means to calm oil markets. It's been my position that this is the quickest way to bring down gas prices. And the reason is very simple, Mr. President. The number one thing jacking up prices right now is the fear in the markets that Iran will shut off its production. We have an economic boycott, many nations of the world, the majority of nations of the world, of Iran to prevent them from going nuclear. And what are they trying to do? They're saber-rattling. They say, you squeeze us too hard, we're going to cut off oil. In fact, they cut off oil sales to Britain and France, although those were just symbolic because Britain and France don't buy much Iranian oil. But with Iran's saber-rattling, that they might well cut off oil exports, the price has gone up and up and up, and those who speculate in oil use that and probably have it go up even further. And so that is why I've been, for the last 2 weeks, suggesting that Saudis say that they will produce more oil, that they will replace every barrel of production that Iran takes off the market for the foreseeable future with a new barrel. And the Saudis, of course, can do that. The Saudis have 2.8 million barrels of extra production, they in the Gulf states. Iran's total sales to the rest of the world is 2.2 million barrels a day. Therefore, they have the ability to do it. Well, today, I was pleased that Saudi Arabia declared it will fill any oil gap as a result of the Iran oil embargo. At the 13th International Energy Forum in Kuwait, the largest gathering of oil-producing and consuming countries, the Saudi oil minister, Ali al-Naimi, said the following, quote, Saudi Arabia and others remain poised to make good any shortfalls, perceived or real, in crude oil supply. Right after the Saudi oil minister made this announcement, prices dropped 0.6%. My belief is if the markets believe this is real, the price will come down significantly further. And so we are asking the Saudis to repeat this promise, because make no mistake, the more the Saudis repeat the promise to offset Iran's output, the more explicit they are, the more emphatic they are, the more they assure the markets that they're for real here, that this is not just a psychological device to calm the markets for the moment, the more the markets will calm down more permanently, and the more the price will come down. Now, I want to compliment the Obama administration for doing tremendous work behind the scenes. I have talked to many people in the administration over the last few weeks, and they assured me and told me some details of what they were doing. And their pressure has finally gotten the Saudis to make this statement. This statement is a great start, but as I said, it should be repeated, re-emphasized, and elaborated upon by the Saudis so that the markets will be assured. The President's right on the money when he said we also need long terms to our dependence on foreign oil. He's right that drilling alone won't solve our problems. We are producing more domestic oil in the United States than we have in 8 years, and we've discovered a huge supply of natural gas. But we have to look at all fronts. We have to look at green energy, wind, solar. There are tax breaks that encourage these new industries that will employ thousands. We ought to pass them. Our colleagues voted against them on this highway bill. That doesn't make much sense. I, for one, would look at nuclear. It's something that produces clean energy, that doesn't produce global warming. It has to be safe. And, of course, we have to continue to look to produce more oil. I was one of 6 or 7, actually, at the senator from Louisiana's importuning, 6 or 7 on this side, who voted to open up parts of the East Gulf to produce more oil, and it has begun to do that, and that will help. And the number one thing we have to do in the long run, Mr. President, is conservation. The fact that we are getting more miles per gallon by 2020 will reduce our importation of foreign oil, which raises the price, by more than 1.1 million barrels a day. And in fact, since we gave the President the ability to increase those CAFE standards further, and he did it, the prediction is by 2030, we won't need to import any oil as our cars get 45 and 50 miles a gallon and the demand for gasoline goes down. And the number one reason we have to import oil is because of gasoline and diesel fuel and airplane fuel. Most of our energy can come from natural gas, can come from water power, wind power, and solar power. So, bottom line, this announcement's a good announcement. I hope the markets will heed it. I hope the Saudis will repeat it. And I hope as a result the price of oil will come down. It is the best news on a very bad front, that is of rising gasoline prices that we've had in a very long time. And let us hope it brings together some good news. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there they go again. On Monday, the Justice Department, under Attorney General Eric Holder, added another count to its litany of shameful actions by refusing to pre-clear a common-sense Texas state law that would require all voters to show a photo ID prior to casting their vote. The Justice Department's refusal to pre-clear this change in Texas law by the Texas legislature is simply inexcusable. The Texas voter ID law is constitutional, and it is a popular measure necessary to protect the integrity of the Texas election process. This is not and should not be a partisan issue. The polling that I've seen show that Republicans, Democrats, and independents in the 70% range all agree that voter ID laws are common sense responses to the concerns that many have about the integrity of the election process. But unfortunately, I can only conclude that Attorney General Holder and the Justice Department have chosen the low road of politics as opposed to the high road of the rule of law. I believe, unfortunately, the evidence supports the conclusion that this represents the lowest form of identity politics. In the face of high gas prices, a sluggish economy, and a rising national debt, the Obama administration has done everything, has used every tool in its political toolbox to try to distract the American people from their priorities, jobs, the economy, and debt, and unfortunately divide the American people while they distract them from the real issues. Political games should not force the state of Texas or any other state to spend its taxpayer dollars suing the Department of Justice in federal court, which it now must do, to enforce a state law that is clearly constitutional. You don't have to take my word for it. Just read an opinion by Justice Stevens in 2008 upholding the constitutionality of a similar Indiana law back in, as I said, in 2008. It's nearly identical to the one in Texas, and it is justified by a valid interest in protecting the integrity and reliability of the electoral process. But the Justice Department continues to insist that there's something wrong with requiring every voter to prove their identity before they vote, just like you're required to do before you board an airplane, before you buy a pack of cigarettes at a convenience store, before you buy a six-pack of beer at that same convenience store, or if you look on the website of the Department of Justice, in order to gain entry to the Department of Justice building, you need, you guessed it, a photo ID. Though this may sound like common sense is evidently not that common at the Department of Justice these days. You would have to be blinded to reality to deny that a significant amount of voter fraud exists in the United States. Every state has had its experience with voter fraud. In Texas, back in the famous Box 13 election between Coke Stevenson and Lyndon Johnson for the United States Senate, they found a number of votes for people who weren't even alive, of dead votes. Perhaps one of the most recent books on this was written by John Fund in 2008 in a book called Stealing Elections: How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy. And in that book, Mr. Fund amply demonstrates why the American people and Texans fear that their legally cast vote will be diluted with the vote of people who are not legally qualified to cast a vote. We also know that identity theft is unfortunately rampant, We've seen this in our broken immigration system where people claim Social Security numbers and identification which is not their own but is actually someone else's. It's also very difficult to prove because often the legal authorities lack what they need in order to dispute a voter's identity, thus the need for a government-issued photo ID. As a result, officials frequently hesitate to accuse someone of casting an illegal ballot, even when they're almost certain that a crime is being committed. It's easy for identity thieves to use another person's voter certificate to fraudulently cast a ballot where there is no real requirement for voters to prove their identity. We should be all about making their job more difficult, not easier. Every case of actual, alleged, or perceived voter fraud holds the potential to drive prospective voters out of the democratic process, undermine the legitimacy of our government, and swing the results in close elections. The Texas voter ID law is necessary to prevent these evils. This administration would have you believe, though, that state ID laws are intended to drive down the turnout among certain ethnic groups. But this could not be further from the truth. If people are legally qualified to vote, this is a law designed to protect their rights and to make sure their vote counts, and that in a close election it will not be swung by people who have no legal right to vote. In fact, in their own letter to the Texas Secretary of State, the Justice Department presented no evidence, zero, zip, nada, no evidence of discriminatory intent in the Texas voter ID law. This is because the law was clearly intended to uphold the sacred principle of one person, one vote, and is narrowly tailored to avoid all retrogressive effects on voting rights. For example, under Texas law, every registered voter is entitled to receive a photo identification card for free. So if you don't have a driver's license, you don't have any other form of a photo ID, you can get one for free. And it also exempts from its requirement anyone above the age of 70. What's more, let's say Election Day comes, you don't have a photo ID, but you want to vote, you can cast a provisional ballot, even without a photo ID, just so long as you come back within 6 days and produce one, showing that you are who you say you are, and thus prove that you are legally qualified to vote. The Texas voter ID law will also make sure that no legitimate voter is caught off guard by requiring the state to inform and educate all citizens as to what the new law requires. Despite these multiple layers of protection, the Justice Department insists on pushing their false narrative that this law will somehow suppress legitimate voter turnout. Just the contrary is true. The only votes that this ID law will suppress are those people who have no legal right to vote. And it will protect and preserve the right of legitimate voters to cast their vote undiluted by votes of people who are not qualified to vote. We also know that there's data from states that have recently passed voter ID laws that demonstrate there's no evidence whatsoever to support the claim of the Department of Justice that it will somehow potentially suppress minority votes. For example, in Indiana, subject of the Supreme Court decision in 2008 was an Indiana voter ID requirement. And in Georgia, election data shows that turnout has actually increased since the passage of these common sense photo ID requirements. The data also shows that the voter ID laws in Georgia and Indiana had no negative impact on minority groups. And these findings should be unsurprising, given some of the research that's been conducted by a number of universities, the University of Missouri, the University of Delaware, the University of Nebraska, among others. Research compiled at the University of Denver and the University of Nebraska from 2000 to 2006 leaves no doubt about the conclusion. They say, quote, concerns about voter identification laws affecting turnout are much ado about nothing, close quote. In spite of these facts, in spite of the evidence, in spite of the law, the Holder Justice Department continues to cling to their false narrative, claiming that Texas has not demonstrated significant enough evidence of voter fraud to justify its voter identification law. Mr. President, that turns the law of the land on its head. Texas is not required to prove to the satisfaction of Eric Holder and the Justice Department that there is sufficient basis for them to pass a state law. As the occupant of the chair knows, as a former Attorney General of his state, the burden is on those who would contest the constitutionality of the law to prove it's unconstitutional or to otherwise prove that it violates federal law. Under Attorney General Holder's view, the state of Texas and any state that passes a voter ID requirement is presumed guilty until proven innocent. As I said, that turns the legal question on its head and gets it exactly opposite of what it should be. The Department of Justice also conveniently fails to mention that voter impersonation is almost impossible to detect or prove without a photo ID requirement, like the one passed by the Texas legislature. They similarly fail to mention that this type of law is perhaps the best way, the least burdensome way, the least intrusive way to eliminate in-person voter fraud. Why would the Justice Department want to prevent states like Texas from enforcing laws that both help detect and deter voter fraud? I can't find an answer for that any other way than to say that it's pure politics. The federal government should be doing everything in its power to encourage states to protect the integrity of the ballot, to make sure that every legitimate voter's vote counts and is not diluted by the illegal vote of someone who is not qualified under the law to cast a ballot. Instead, Eric Holder's Justice Department is throwing up roadblocks to those state-based efforts to protect the integrity of the election process, forcing my state and taxpayers in my state to waste money to try to go to court and now to override his decision, which the court will do. And why will they do that? Why can I be so sure? Because the United States Supreme Court is the law of the land, not Eric Holder and not the Justice Department. And the Supreme Court has spoken on this issue. But that's irrelevant to Mr. Holder and the Justice Department. So my state has to waste, really, taxpayer money to defend this legitimate and even-handed requirement when we should be focusing on other important issues. This Washington game of divisive identity politics is reprehensible, and Attorney General Holder should be ashamed of himself for engaging in it. I hope my colleagues will join me in calling on Attorney General Holder to respect the rights of the people of Texas and of their states by reversing his decision to block our common-sense voter identification law. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from New York.
I note the absence of, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be vitiated.
Without